All right, let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into these contingencies because they are the meat and potatoes of the contract, right? You have your offer date, you have your closing date, but right in the middle, that's where all the contingencies are. That's where all the inspections take place. That's where appraisals are done. That's where everything that you need to get your loan is done. So let's take a look at them, right? So, what are the contingencies? The contingencies are terms and conditions laid out in the offer acceptance. So, basically, we lay all these out to the seller. As a buyer, you lay all those out to the seller before you submit your contract. The seller reviews them and says, yes, I accept all of these contingencies. I accept the time frames. I accept the terms of these contingencies, right? And some of these examples are going to be investigation of the property. So that's going to include some seller disclosures. That's going to include title docs, HOA docs if you're buying a condo or a single family residence that's inside of an HOA. And then NHD is your natural hazard disclosure, right? So it'll tell you kind of what's going on with the property, earthquake zone, things like that, right? And then we also want to make sure that we have inspection for the property, which is home, pest, sewer, roof. That's kind of just your standard. There are some other inspections you can do, but it's going to be pretty property specific if you do something else. Appraisal of the property, and also you have qualifying for your loan as a contingency, right? So if something happens, you lose your job or whatever, right before or in the middle of an escrow, now you no longer qualify for the loan. You are able to back out, keep your deposit, and move on, right? These are some of the most common contingencies, but there are some other contingencies that can be included, right? Contingency of sale. So if you are a buyer, but you already have a home and you're trying to upgrade your home, right? You're going from something smaller to something larger, or you're downsizing, right? You're going from something big to something small. You can have that contingency where you tell the seller of the home you're buying that, hey, I really want to buy your house, but I have to sell my house first. And then you set up a contingency. It's usually about 14, 17 days to get your house on the market and into contract and moving along through your contingencies on the sale of your house before you start moving on to the other one. And there's also a very important contingency in there, which is review of leased and lien items. Usually this is solar, or if you're in Sacramento, we have what's through the county, you can get a green energy loan that basically allows you to like upgrade your power, upgrade your windows or roof, or even solar, and you can get that loan and it's tied into your property taxes. So instead of it being a loan on for you, it goes to the property, attaches to the property, and is a part of the property taxes. Now a seller or a buyer might ask you to pay those things off, but it is a negotiable item. So if you can't come to an agreement on it, you are able to back out of the contract. Now, talking about contingency removals, right? Usually, in the contract, standard dates are 17 days for all these contingencies. But most of the time, when you're making an offer, your agent is going to have you negotiate your inspection contingency, possibly the appraisal contingency, and most likely you're going to leave the loan contingency, right? Unless you don't need a loan and it's cash, then that's something different. But you'll probably move those days, maybe say 10 days for inspection, 14 days for an appraisal to come back. That way you're just not, it forces you to move along. It tells the seller that, hey, I'm going to be active in this sale, in this purchase. I'm going to do the things that I need to do, which I'm going to do my due diligence on this property and keep moving along. And that's something that you tell the seller in your contract that you're going to do, right? And you try to stick to that as much as possible, right? And these dates are all negotiated before the contract. So even if you put all 17, most likely the seller's going to come back and be like, yo, here's a counter. Let's update these dates and move forward with a new contract. And just so you know, like contingencies are in place here it's a way out of the contract for the buyer, right? So you already put up your deposit. You tell the seller, I'm active in this property. I'm going to push. Here's how serious I am. Here's my deposit, right? But these contingencies are conditions, right? And these conditions aren't met, and you don't remove these contingencies. And whether negotiations go bad, or you found out too much information and the property is no longer appealing, you have these there as protection to say, hey, I'm not going to buy this house anymore. I'm going to leave. I'm going to use this contingency to get out of the contract, and please release my deposit. So why would you want to remove contingencies before close? Well, the reason for these contingency dates to put into the contract is not only to protect you as a buyer, but it also protects the seller in a way, right? Because the seller doesn't want to have their property held up by someone who's not serious about purchasing their property. Yeah, you might have put up a big deposit, but then you start getting into it and you realize, oh, the seller might realize that you as a buyer, you're not performing, right? And if you're not performing, the seller can start to demand that you do perform. You start meeting the dates that you agreed upon in the purchase contract. And if you don't, the seller can then push to get out of the contract, and you will lose the home. So it kind of works both ways on the contingencies. It's a last resort for the seller to get out of the contract if a buyer isn't performing, but it's also good for the buyer if they find out information about the property they do not like or they do not want to take on. So once you start working through these contingencies, you'll start pushing to close. So once documents and negotiations have been settled with respect to the contingencies, you can feel confident in removing the contingencies and pushing to close on your home. Be sure to review all documents associated with the property thoroughly and that you are confident in your due diligence. So make sure you're reviewing these contracts. If any questions come up, do not be afraid to ask, because this is a big purchase and you want to have all the information you possibly can about the property and to make sure you're making the right decision for you. Now, once you've done all that, you will be ready for your final walkthrough and you'll be right to the end before closing. All right, so let's move on to the next video.